Hello, everybody. Hello, welcome to this very special episode of me working on 4coder. The reason it's so special today is that a big confluence of many events worked together to create one very awesome special occasion, and so I felt like I should, you know, make it a little bit more dramatic than usual. So, here's what we're doing. First of all, 2 weeks ago, on this very day, 2 weeks ago, I released 4CPP Lexer 1.0 to my Patreon backers. And at that time, I promised to release the Lexer library to everyone 2 weeks later. That's today. Well, it turns out that about 2 or 3 days before that time came, I was sitting there thinking about what should I work on next, and I thought, how about I do the next version of the Lexer library? As soon as I did it, it took just about a couple hours of work. I fixed a few problems with the relexer, and then the day later, did another few hours of work, and I cleaned out all of the temporary buffer problem that it used to have, and then I remembered after that I went, oh wait, now this means I have a new version already. I can't release the old one, so as of today, it's available right now on Handmade Network. 4CPP Lexer 1.1 is available to everyone in the world. It has fully chunked relexing and it has no temporary buffer that it used to have for the Patreon backers who know maybe that they looked at it and saw that that was a bit of an odd quirk in the API. It's all fixed. But what's even more special is after that was fixed, I was able to switch to the gap buffer. So 4coder 4012 now runs in a gap buffer, which meant I was going through the old buffer code. I reread a lot of how the buffer streaming works, and I realized that some of it was redundant and wasn't being used anymore because the custom code has a similar streaming mechanism it's a little bit different, but it was, all of the sort of fancy things that I used to need on the internal stuff I didn't need, so I cleared out all of that. I cleared out all of the old buffer types, so I didn't keep I finally deleted the rope and the multi-gap buffer and the golden array code. It's all been deleted. The only way to get to it now is if I go back to my my Git repo and pull it back out, but otherwise it's out of the code base. And I was reading through cleaning things up, and I started cleaning up the buffer rendering code, and I was reading it, and I got some ideas from reading it and realized that the distance from where I am to a very interesting new feature is quite short. Now, the new feature is not done yet, but I will now walk you through all of the events that led me to discover what the next new feature in 4coder will be besides just the gap buffer. Alright, so I'm going to take a seat now. We're going to make this a normal 4coder stream from here on out, and I will explain to you what is coming. Let's see. Doop. Do. Alright, and we need to adjust the camera back to the sitting height. Alright, there we go. So, let's take a look. First of all, we don't need that scratch buffer message anymore. And we do need, we need to look at a file. Now this file here was given to me by Insofar As, the Linux porting extraordinaire who works on the Linux port of 4coder. He was working on some stuff, and he sent this file to me because it exposed a bug in the Lexer maybe about a week ago. This was before I had made the 1.1 version of the Lexer, but I looked at the bug and I fixed it. So this is a bug that was present in the first library that's now fixed. And the interesting thing about this bug is right now we're looking at 4coder 4011. This thing on the screen right here is 4011. So let's go look at what that bug looks like in 4coder. It's on line 230. It's on this line right here. It was crashing the Lexer. Well, here's the thing. What's weird about this line? Looks normal. Everything about it is fine. You can edit around it. Of course, it used to have a bug, but it still has a bug. It's just hidden between this quote and that quote. There are 3 bytes in between them. So what am I talking about here? In particular, what I'm talking about is that there's a Unicode character encoded right between those bytes, and 4coder doesn't just just doesn't care at all. It just says there's nothing there. It doesn't advance the X, position. So when it lines characters up, it thinks that nothing ever occurred there. It doesn't render anything, and once in a while the cursor disappears. So I was reading through the buffer rendering code, and I thought, all right, we can fix that pretty easily. So I'm going to show you what right now 4coder is doing about this situation. Let me shut down this version, and let's switch over here and run 4coder in the debugger. Alright, line 230. Alright, so that's a little different. What I chose to do was, anytime I saw a character, I put a little slash number there to indicate, there's a byte here that you can't render in ASCII mode, but I wanted to show you that the byte exists. And, it navigates like you would expect. That's what I've been working on so far, is getting just the ASCII mode to never, sort of get confused by these characters here. And it's not totally done, but let me show you another interesting consequence of this. This means that 4coder is pretty close to a data editing, data reading, data writing kind of like a binary file reader modifier type situation. And that's what we're looking at here, the DLL that I've added to my test case so that I can look through it, and it's completely navigable. I can move my cursor around in it, and every single byte is shown. There's a few problems. 4coder automatically strips out all the carriage returns in a file, which means you actually don't want to do this yet, because I haven't made a binary mode that respects the carriage returns as binary and leaves them there. Once the binary mode is added, you'll be able to read this up, and I'm guessing there will be a binary character here, and it'll actually display this in more of a sort of a memory layout pattern instead of as a text file. But here's another thing that's going on that's interesting. It's not true that binary files have this many new line characters. So why does this look like it's got so many new lines at regular positions? Well, that's because it's line wrapping. So here's another new feature, and you'll see why we need this feature soon. But the new feature is I decided it was time to separate out the wrapping position from the width of the panel. So now I can adjust where the wrapping position is independently of the panel, right? So that's kind of neat. But where am I going with that? What's the point in adding that? What does that even have to do with the rest of this? Well, the last thing is this. If I start clicking around here, you'll start noticing it's missing, right? It's not hitting the right spot. And the reason for that is that the wrapping code does and always has kind of cheated. And the way it cheats is it assumes that the wrapping position of a line is guaranteed to be the sort of, and by wrapping position I mean how many, where does this line begin in comparison to the next line, right? Well, how many wrapped lines are there for this one text line? And it just assumes it could take the width and divide it by the width, take the width of the whole line unwrapped and divide it by the width of the wrapping region. But that isn't quite correct. The reason that's not correct is once in a while you'll get a situation where, like right here, there's a character that nothing filled these two spots. So actually, even though the whole width of the line might only be like, I don't know, 1,000 and the wrapping position is 100, it might actually take more than 10 lines to fill all that, because once in a while you throw some space away, and as that congregates and gets worse and worse, you start getting farther and farther off from where you're supposed to be, and so all of the sort of cursor seeking stuff is totally confused by the wrapping positions, because the wrapping metadata is just wrong. So, to get this working properly, which I want to do before I introduce binary mode, I need to get line wrapping working properly. But while I'm getting line wrapping working properly, I needed to separate line wrapping from the position of the view, because if they're not separated, then I need something very fast. I can't always, every time the buffer is edited, iterate the entire thing and figure out the new wrap positions. So instead I said, people probably don't need to change the wrap positions very often. So if you're adjusting here or whatever, and you don't mind that it's like, okay, I want it wrapped, but I'll just, I'll shrink it off view for a moment and then I'll bring it back in later, or I'll, shrink it and then adjust my wrap position now and whatever. That way it doesn't have to update as frequently. If you're just moving this around or you're typing, it shouldn't have to constantly update wrap data in a very complicated way. It should be able to do something smart, but I can't just do divides anymore, which is what I've been relying on. So that's why the fixed width, or the separated width is there. Okay. So there's a lot of different things all wrapped up into everything I just said. So let me put all the pieces together for you now, because here's what my plan is for 4012. First, I'm going to fix the ASCII mode so that it has line wrapping working correctly. Right, and that is, it's going to wrap correctly for these kinds of characters that are wider than one or two or wider than one character, or that lines in general where that you have missing space. I'm going to make the line wrapping always right. 2, I'm going to introduce a binary mode and a Unicode mode. So that's the plan for 4012. Alright. So, with that all out there and done, it's time today to actually get to the task of writing some new code. So, first things first, I have to fix that line wrapping bug because I'm not okay with having a bug in the ASCII mode before I go adding new modes. On top of that, I want to make sure that there are different rules for how each character gets represented. For instance, not everyone wants a force character tab, a force-based tab here. And maybe not everyone wants this representation for these characters. Maybe they just want the red square, or maybe they I don't know. There's different options that could be employed here and there that I want to make sure I have flexibility for what ASCII mode looks like when it encounters specific characters. So that's another thing we'll think about if I get the line wrapping stuff working. But the point is, we can't really assume anything about the widths of characters, so we're going to do iteration and see where the wrap position needs to be. Alright, let's see. Don't need that anymore. Alright, so let's run 4coder. I can just run it the regular way now. Okay, so last thing I did, actually I'll pull up my to-do list here so we can all be on the same page. Right here is cleaning up the buffer behavior stuff. Right now we're still working on getting the navigation to work correctly around multi-glyph characters, and then there's binary mode and Unicode mode. Actually, that just says Unicode file names. I saw the word Unicode and thought that meant Unicode buffer, but I guess it didn't, so my copy-paste was sloppy. Alright, so yeah, let's work on this part. So that is somewhere in the buffer stuff, mostly. Buffer abstract. And as an aside, because this is interesting, because of all the code cleanup that's happened, the lines of code on 4coder has dropped dramatically down to 38,900 at this point. Okay. So I have high hopes for 4012 to be awesome. Alright, let's take a look. So this is where I'm getting render data, and the way I'm rendering out these sort of slash special characters is whenever I see a character that isn't between space and tilde, or tilde, I forget what that thing is called, the squiggly line. I just put a slash down and then I interpret it as hexadecimal and put those characters out. The problem is the wrap routine. So let's go take a look at that. Y plus equals font height, and right here you can see what I'm talking about. It just assumes it can take the width and divide by the max width, and that'll give it the right number of lines. But this is just not true. So we need a smarter system here. And really, this system's not going to have anything to do with widths anymore, so this will just be irrelevant. But let's see, do I have any other spots where I'm setting wrap positions? So this gets the gets the line index from wrapped Y. I don't think I'm setting wrap positions anywhere else. Here's wraps. Now that's just getting a cursor position again. So that's all reading wraps. So that's where the bug happens, because the wrap positions are wrong. If the wrap positions were right, those would all work. Okay, so it's just this spot, it looks like, which makes this particular problem possibly exceedingly straightforward. So what we want to do is, it looks like we're visiting each line and then deciding its wrap position from that. That's not going to fly anymore. So it's going to be more like measuring width. So let's pull that up over here. And then over here, come back down here. Line starts. I don't think line starts are not affected. Widths are not affected, although we might not need widths anymore, because I think that was just a trick for getting the wrap Ys quickly. Widths count. Line count. Why is the width different from the line count? I don't even know what some of this code is doing, actually. This code might be weird, too. What does widths count do? Why is that different from line count? Oh, it's not. Oh, that's the old width count. So this is remeasure. Let's go up to just the spot where we measure the widths. Do we have that? Alright, right here we measure starts and widths, and that involves measuring starts, widths. Alright. So, what does this look like? Oh, this is a pretty old style. Let's see. I'm going to put end right here. Size is the buffer size. Result equals 1. I equals state I. Start equals state start. Width equals state width. Char will just clear to 0 to begin with. Start putter and all of that. That comes from buffer line starts, buffer line widths, buffer line starts. Alright, so let's take those and oops, and let's see. I'll start that right there, I think, is where it makes sense. Maybe. I'm trying to figure out what this code does as I read it. So I'm like reinterpreting it by adjusting it in small ways. the width pointer. So I have, it looks like, a start and end position for the line starts, and then I have a width pointer for the widths, and I'm just assuming they need to iterate the same number of steps, I believe. Those are part of the old and slightly clunky internal buffer stream, which is not as nice as the custom buffer streams. So I should rewrite that soon. Why don't we just do that this way? In fact, then I can even go so far as to put all of that together like that. Uh-oh. Alright, so if start pointer reaches the end pointer, then we're done. We go to here. Otherwise, I increase this by the width, which is what? Oh, I see. So at every step, I'm counting up the size, the total width. Alright, so this is basically what I need to look at. Let's call you the old way of doing it that we don't do anymore because it's wrong. And let's call this the, well, I already did call it this, but it's the old clunky version of my buffer streams. And we'll just grab a copy of you and do a loop. Stringify loop, buffer I size, and there's one of the tricks. I need to set I to something. Buffer measure starts. Ah, yes. Alright, so for now I'll do why would I ever need that state? Is there ever a reason why? I see. So right here I'm saying that I'm punting on it and then I'll resume later, potentially. And the reason that I do that, does it like run out of memory? Yeah, that's what it's doing. So we don't know how many lines there are at the beginning of this. So it's, if it runs out of memory, it returns. What I should do is say, rewrite this with Duff's routine. Let's just call that Duff routine. I think that'd be something that makes more sense to say. But I'll probably also rewrite that once I'm ready to eliminate widths, because I don't think I need widths anymore. But in the meantime, I do need an I, and the good news is I can just assert now that oh, I guess this already does this kind of it. This just basically assumes that the wraps y is large enough for the array. Okay. So we begin the loop. We buffer stringify good on the loop. We buffer stringify next on the loop. And then we got to do this nonsense because my API design skills were not as good a year ago when I wrote the buffer system. Alright, I need a char ch. So ch will equal I'm going to need a size, by the way. Ch equals the data, I, and then what I want is if ch equals new line, we do one thing, otherwise we do another. And the reason that's the way it works is when we see a new line, we will tell it that it should store the last wrap Y that it found, and then keep going. And one thing this API here does not let me do is sort of ask it to insert a new line for me magically at the end of the buffer, which the new one kind of lets me do. It lets me do it with null characters, but that would be the same thing. Well, actually, you'd have to use a new line in this case. But yeah, I could easily extend it to do new lines, but can't do that with this one. So I'll have to be a little bit more verbose here, and I'll clean it up someday. So if I have the new line character, I don't need to break out of this ever because I'm assuming I've got enough space. So all I do is I go, alright, wraps, we'll call it wrap index equals last wrap, then I'll plus the wrap index. Now, those things I just invented there, those are the wrap index, which needs to start at 0, and the last wrap, which needs to start at 0. I also need the current wrap to start at 0. And then what will happen is after this, the last wrap becomes the current wrap, like so. Plus, I think one line height maybe? Plus one font height. So if I'm reading along and I see a new line character, I'm at a certain Y right now. That new line character always means that the next line, that the next character has a plus on the font height there. Otherwise, what I do is going to be based on the advanced data. So I'm actually going to need to change up the signature of this a little bit. I need to tell it about advanced data. And so what I do is I keep an x position which starts at 0. If x, or what I need to do is get at any given point I need to get the current advance. The current advance is just the advance, and technically I said char, that should be a U8, so that the array indexing works properly. Alright, if current advance ch equals advance ch, then what I want to do is say, look, if x plus current advance is greater than the max width, then what we do is we increment the current wrap by one font height, and we set the x back to 0. Else we just x plus equals the current advance, right? So this sort of trickier version of rounding needs to be there so that it gets the right wrap positions all the time. And Up here we need to set the x back to 0 because it, oh, this should actually be plus current advance, shouldn't it? But right here we set it to 0 because it's going to be at the beginning of a new line now. And that should work, except that I can't compile yet because I'm changed that signature. But let's take a look. It's not that bad. One of the changes is even right here. What's going on? Oh, you thought that was a parameter because you're a huge dick. That's why we can't do that. This is why we can't have nice things. Alright, so now the only issue left is this. Now, the truth is we're going to need to write a remeasure routine because I don't want to measure all of the buffer every time viewMeasureWraps gets called. So the architecture needs to change a little bit now. The old one assumed that we could always just remeasure the whole file every time because it was just by line, but you know, after thinking about it a little while back, I realized that was never going to hold up. So now we're fixing that. And that means we have to do a remeasure version. But that's okay. Remeasuring won't be too hard. As long as we're remeasuring because of an edit, by the way. If we have to remeasure because of the position change, we got to do the whole file. Like if the width changes, then everything is scrapped. Okay, so line height, max width, measure wrap-wise. Yeah, I need the advanced data. Is there any way I can get my hands on some advanced data here? Okay, we got to track down how you get advanced data. The fuck? F32, man. Ooh, font arrow advanced data. That sounds good. How did you font? Oh, get font info. Yes. Okay, so font equals get font info and then font advanced data. So, adv, comma, what we need to do is we need to get the font. That means we need the models. But that's okay, we can pass the models in here. Then we can get the font set. From the font set, I can use the file. Do I have a file? There's a buffer. I don't get why that's on a separate line. That looks stupid. Let's do this. Editing file equals this, and then file arrow there. And we need the pointer to that buffer. Okay. So that means I've got the file. I can get the file settings, font ID, pull out the font. It's a lot of pointer chasing. I'll think about that some other time. Hopefully we're not remeasuring widths very often. I guess. Maybe we are. I don't know. We'll see. Okay, so I pull out the font. From that I should be able to get the advanced data. More pointer chasing. You can see measure wraps gets called in a lot of places, and some of those need to be some of those need to be remeasures instead of full measures, like this right here where we're doing a cursor fix when we remeasure. We link across all items for each file. We measure the wraps. Is this a good place for this? Q. Seems a bit odd. Fine. I'll leave you to just do it this way. Okay, so we need to pass models in here apparently because I have steadfastly refused to do that. So just pass in that, and I will pull these out manually. Really, I'm passing the models, I'm storing the models in the view. I don't like that. Not sure why that's true. Why am I not just passing the models into this? Alright, so making that change, I had to provide the models through an entire branch of the call stack because like from bottom to top that wasn't getting it before because it's now relying on font when it used to think it was font independent, but I don't see any way that it could be font independent really. So really the question is more like, how can I make that call stack more shallow so that I don't feel so bad about it? But we'll do that later. Alright, so let's see if anything works at all. Let's run this in the debugger, because there's a good chance it just crashes hard. Alright, so far so good. Let's open up an easy case. Some text file, but not like the empty text file. And, okay, so it's wrapping. Let's move that wrap position around so we can kind of see it. Alright. That doesn't work at all. Totally broken, definitely. Okay, so yeah, that's broke. Yeah. So it thought that was all one line for some reason. Yes, very bad. Very bad. Okay. So what happened there? Let me read my code more carefully. Measure wrap y. It looked like I asked it to go down one, and it didn't. It's almost as if, so last wrap, it should be increasing current wrap by font height every single time it sees a new line. Wrap index goes up one. Actually, why don't we write this like so? At the other end, we can assert that wrap index equals buffer line count. Uh-oh. That's true. I didn't handle that case that I complained about because of the missing new line situation. Okay. When we get to the very end, we need to actually set wrap index plus plus equals the last wrap one last time. Okay. So this is now wrapping. We'll just use the messages buffer over here. And yeah, it's totally broke. If I do that, it just gets worse, not better. Look at that. It thinks that that is one line difference somehow. And if I'm clicking, yeah, it's way off. So there it's okay. There it thinks line 2, like it thinks the second line position starts way down there. That doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense. Alright, let's take a look in the debugger at what happens when this function right here gets called. Gingerbill, it won't be too far away from being able to wrap by word now because I'm going to be building out the wrap system. Basically, word wrap will probably be a side benefit of this little misventure that I have begun here with 4.0.12. Possibly word wrapping. I might mess with left side, like since I've got the thing that arbitrarily puts a margin on the right, I might do the same thing on the left and try to fit line numbers down the side now. We'll see. Obviously, line numbers will be optional. Okay, so here we go. I start going. Okay, this was the empty file, so we put one right there and we're done. Second guy comes through. This guy is not empty. Okay. So the third guy comes through. This guy is not empty. How many times are you going to measure wraps on this one poor file? Oh, for fuck's sake. I've definitely got some issue here that I need to address, because it just remeasured that 3 times. There we go. It's probably going to remeasure this one 3 times too. Whew. That's an issue. Alright, we're going to deal with that. Okay, so 2746. Alright, we get a character. That character is not a new line, so I say, what's my current advancement? Or what's the advancement of the current character, I should say? It's 9. So is x plus 9 greater than the max width? It is not, so I increment by 1. Next. Welcome. This is going to say welcome. So it goes WELCOME. M-E space. Now where is the X position currently? 72 out of 672. So this will go on for a little while. Let's see if it eventually lands here. Okay, so current advance. No, not current. X is at 270. So it never reached max width, which is right. That's what it's supposed to do. So last wrap is 0. It puts down a 0 in the wraps array. What's the line count here? 68. Okay, so it puts down a 0. It sets X to 0, and we continue. We get a new character. Eventually we should land here again. Current wrap, last wrap is 17 now, so that, yeah, it says 17 right there. And if it thinks line 1 begins on 17, well, let's just see. I want to see after, ooh, okay, so I just put 17 there a second time. Current wrap. Last wrap equals current wrap. Oh, I see. I see. So it updated last wrap to here, but it didn't update this to there, which it should have done. So this should be more like current wrap plus equals font height, last wrap equals current wrap. Okay, so that is working again. That appears to be working there on the wrap point. Let's change the wrap amount. Okay, that appears to be fixed, which is good. Can I click? I can click around, and it doesn't appear to be drifting off point at all. So that's good. Let's turn the wrapping off over there. Let's switch to a more interesting problem. Alright, here. So I can move left and right. I was always able to move left and right. What about up and down? It's potentially more stable, but hard to tell. Let's try clicking. That will be the real telltale sign of this working. Ah, fascinating. So the line wrap rule now works. Alright, everyone. It's been a good stream. No, I'm kidding. We've obviously got plenty more to do, but man, that was not as bad as I was expecting. Not sure why. This is one of those things that I've thought for a long time would be a pain in the ass. That just turned out to be like 10-15 minutes of work. Alright, I see what happens there. That's a little slightly unrelated problem. Probably dealing with how rounding works. Let's just double check. Yeah. I can still click anywhere on that and get the right spot. Alright. So there we have it. If basic wrapping works, let's go deal with that thing where it initialized the wraps 3 times. While I'm at it, you can go to hell, and this code up here can get out of the way. Awesome. Let's rebuild after that first. Whoops, sorry. Not reps that I don't care about. I do care about reps, I'm sorry. It's, I guess I already got rid of the widths. Okay. Let's look at this in the debugger now. Why did the empty buffer go through this function 3 times? It's ridiculous. Alright, so, we're doing, app step. This is during an initialization frame. So I call the start hook. The start hook opens a panel by v-splitting. V-splitting has to be called through the exec command thing, which is dumb. Let's see, open panel v-split, gets the active view, calls open view, does a v-split right, view split right I mean, gets the new view, hides its scroll bar, that's all fine. So here we are calling the wrapper to open view, which calls into the link to this function here. Let's see. So, just a reminder, we're on the start hook. Going to open view. Trying to fill the view. No, we're making an empty panel. Right. Panel make empty just means that panel make empty means that we're allocating a view and assigning it to the view. So this is just the way I initialize views to make them empty. And I'm giving it the scratch buffer. Okay. So I come in here, I've got a file, I'm not setting it to null, which technically is illegal now, I think. I should put insert invalid code path right here, I think. But, anyway, so I'm coming in here, I'm setting the... Each buffer has a font. Interesting. If each buffer also came with a wrap rule instead of the view coming with a wrap rule, it could actually store its Y positions. That of course means one view buffer can't be viewed with 2 different fonts or 2 different wrap amounts, but I'm not sure why you would ever want that. That'd be confusing. And then we can actually get out of the business of storing wrap-wise in the view altogether. It's going to be so good. Yeah, I think this is the right way to do it. So anyway, so it comes in here, view measure wraps happens because it's calling view set file, and view set file believes that whenever a file gets set to a view, it has to update that view's wrap positions, because each view has its own wrap position based on where its display width is, which can be different per view at the moment. Right, there's the display width of the view. And maybe what we want is to actually let the display width come from the file and then store the wrap-wise in the file along with the rest of the buffer information. Yeah, that'd be really nice. Okay. Anyway, so we measure the wrap-wise, and that's why we are currently doing this. Alright, next time this happens, what's happening? So again, you're setting the file, but why is that happening? View set file message buffer. Oh, so the second time through was the message buffer, not the scratch buffer. And it just didn't have anything written on it yet, I guess. Not sure why we don't just write something on the message buffer first before we show it. I'll look into that. Okay, then next time it gets called, okay, we're setting a file again. We're setting that to scratch, but we've already said that all buffers get set to scratch when they're opened and left empty, so this loop here is dumb. Okay. Uh-oh. So when do I pass 0 in there then? Panel make empty. Scratch buffer hasn't been opened yet. Ah. Right, the very first one that I make gets it empty right there. So why am I not opening the message buffer, or the scratch buffer then, instead? Looks like almost everything has to be initialized by this point. Let's just try this. Let's try and say that my scratch buffer exists here. The working set is what? It's nonsense. So here I'm trying to init a normal file. Initting a normal file, I pass the models in there. And what is up with this? The working set isn't ready or something? Oh, this working set looks fine. So I'm trying to create a file from string. I'm calling the open hook. That's interesting. My file settings. I'm trying to get the buffer. So I call the get buffer wrapper. I'm trying to get that from the working set. Oh, command data isn't set up properly. That's interesting. Why don't I just set that up? Okay, so to fix this, what I need to do is something I've wanted to do for a while, which is to clean up the way the command data works. The command data is just a thing that gets passed around to describe the state of the world during a command execution phase. And command data is also used for hooks, which are a terrible thing that shouldn't exist. But for now, we can try to make this work. But you can see right here I've got a comment that says eliminate this shit yo. If I didn't have this, then it would be pretty straightforward for me to set up a command data during app init. But with these, it becomes kind of ambiguous what that would even mean, because the structure, this just sort of assumes that the command data is being set up in one particular place in the code. So if I want to make it possible to set it up anywhere, I just need to eliminate them. And the good news is there's other ways in this system to get these values. So if I eliminate them, I get the cleanest method where I don't duplicate any state. So let's eliminate that shit, yo. Alright, so rec open view grabs a view from the command panel. Now, the command panel is not a thing. There's no command panel. So this doesn't make any sense. Doesn't make any sense at all. What we need to do is we need to go to the command, I don't know, command data. You have something called layout, live set, system. You have the models. Okay. Models, layout, I believe. Models.h layout. Dot panels, right? And then I need to go again. Why don't we do a little bit nicer version of this where I go like that. I'll begin a block right here, so that I can get the panel index out of this layout struct here. The layout has an active panel. Then using the active panel, I should be able to get yeah, okay, let's do that right there. Let's put the open brace right here. Okay, let's see. We got the panel index. Now you get the panel. That's in the models layout dot panels plus panel index. We're not done yet. Now that I've got the panel, let's set n equal to the panel's view. Okay, so now when I require an open view, it does all this nastiness, but at least it doesn't have to pull out the panel, right? Okay, so use view, same basic problem, I assume, right? Yeah. So use view is going to be very similar to all this complexity here, so why don't I just copy that, paste it, increase there, take out that step, and there you go. Now that means that what I really want to do is I want to get rid of that and that, come up here and get rid of all of this, and I just want to use the view n, and after using that view I want to do this extra requirement. Actually, we could go as easy as use the view and then you do the requirement. Panel, use panel. Alright, so use panel, again, is very similar to this. Only the difference is I start with a panel there, and we set n equal to that. Okay, what about a readable view? What is that? Okay, so it's doing that shit again. So let's tell it to, instead of this, use the view, and then do whatever check it needs to do. Panel. Update command data was just there to update those broken stupid state variables that I didn't need. So now I don't need to call it anywhere, which is good. Okay, so now what has to happen is I have to start getting the vputter in the correct way in a few places where I was ignoring it before. Let's see, vputter equals imp get view. There it is. Vputter equal vputter semicolon. There we go. Yeah, so there you go. Just do that. And there we go. Put that right there. Ah, that is a bit different. So the problem is, okay, so actually what I want to do is going to look basically like use view vputter. Man, how many times did I do that? Not sure why that's if view. That should be assert view. Alright, there we go. So that should do nothing at all, except now I can, in the app init, before I try to open any files, I can try to set up a command data struct. So command data, command, there it is. I see. So what I have to do is that comes from right there. We can grab all that. I believe I have access to all of this. So let's try. Alright, cool. So now I can assert that I never need to open a view with a null file pointer. Going way back to where we started now. So let's see. I'm here doing the app init, and I'm setting up the scratch buffer. Now I'm here doing the app step, view change size, huh? I see. So the first screen always has a view change size. Does that mean that when it first initialized, it initialized with totally bogus view information? Max width of 672. Yeah, so when we resize panels, we don't need to measure the wraps at all. view change size. Let's take a look at what that does. So view change size looks to see if we have a file, and if it does, it remeasures the wraps and moves the cursors around. Okay, so fuck that. We don't do that anymore, because 4coder is getting better than it used to be. Alright, so what this used to do was loop over all those things, refit them, and then refit the layout, and then it would loop over all of these. Okay, so at first it checked if there's an issue. In other words, it checks if the layout, if the screen size has changed, relays out the panels if it needs to, and then it does this iteration, which basically just doesn't need to happen, because code is bad and terrible, and deleting it is fun. That means I don't need any of that, or you. Alright, so now I initialize this during app-init, and then later during my start hook, I change the font on global, and then I have to remeasure all the files. Ah, yes, that's true. If I do initially open files and then the user changes the font right away, I'm going to end up remeasuring twice. Is that something that's worth avoiding, or do I just let that happen? Because if I allow that, I do spend a little bit of extra time in knitting that I need to, because I could have just said, oh, you know, it doesn't matter, don't measure yet, because you're guaranteed on the first frame to change the font. Of course, you're not actually, so what I would have to do is actually see if the user changes the font at any point during the first frame, and if they don't, then initialize it anyway. But if they do, I could avoid some startup cost, but in exchange for that, I would either have to have a thing that tracks whether a thing has been measured by the end of the first frame before I render or something, or I could just allow zeros to be passed to that thing that I was trying to not let zeros be passed to, because I'm guaranteed that once the files have been initialized later, if I don't try to initialize them early, if I let them be initialized later, then the global font has been set. So they won't get initialized to one font and then changed right away. I think that I don't like that because it seems to me like the best thing to do is to be able to do anything during app-init, and if the thing that I'm worried about is time, I'll see if that actually is the thing that I need to worry about anyway. Like, I'm only opening an empty file. It's the scratch buffer. I might open messages too and leave it empty at first, but since they're empty, I don't really care, right? So I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to leave it the way it is. Let it measure that twice. Yeah. So what's it measuring this for now? What is this? It's now setting this view to look at the message buffer. So do I measure once when I first create it and then again when I set it into a view, or what's the deal there? Once at init, once when I set the global font, panel make empty, that again when I open a new panel, and since each panel thinks it needs to measure separately the wraps because I haven't moved the wraps to the buffers yet, it does it again. Here I'm setting somebody to the message buffer, which is empty, And then what? Then I write to the message buffer, it looks like, later, right? Yeah, so here I'm actually writing the message into the message buffer. For some reason I decided that needed to be later in the initial frame, which I'm going to see if I can't put that earlier. But then it measures that again here. Because basically if I set a buffer to a view, it measures it then. What I'm going to do is say, look, a buffer knows how wide it wants to be rendered at, so you can always adjust that, but that buffer and that buffer alone knows its own font and its own width. So it's up to you, it's up to that buffer to know where its wrap positions are if they're currently being relevant. Now, do I store wrap positions all the time, or do I free them when a buffer is not in use because they take up memory? I don't know. Probably leave them in. I mean, I leave start positions and widths in. I've always left all that buffer information in. I didn't leave wrap positions in, but that's just one more array. It does mean if I replace the start or the widths with wraps, so that the buffer just has starts and wraps instead of starts and widths, and the views has wraps, it would be actually still saving memory over what I've got. So I think that's what we'll do, is we'll say we just always store these things in the buffer once this whole system is worked out properly. Alright, what's this one? Doing another feed, measure wraps. Does that get called twice somehow? View measure ramps. No, maybe it's the same one and I didn't hit it? I don't know. Okay. So, until I've moved that over to the buffer, I think I don't want to spend too much more time trying to fiddle with it, because it's all kind of pointless until I see, like, there's no point in optimizing the number of remeasures we're doing at this point if it's going to be up to the buffer anyway. Now, one thing I do want to do is I want to initialize the message buffer during app-init. So we'll be initialized to empty. If I wanted to be doubly fancy, what I could do is just say, look, we have like a set of things we need to initialize. Cool, so we delete some more code. Uh-oh. Ah, I see. I set them both to message buffer, but I actually want one of those to be scratch buffer, because those are different there. Okay. Well, this part's going to get a little wonky, but it'll be fine. Not sure if I'm allowed to do this actually. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to declare it that way. Oh, looks like I can. Alright, cool. So now, I'm going to take a short break, and I'm going to come back, make sure everything is working properly for a bit, and then I'm going to try to move the wraps and the wrap positions to the buffer where it will be, and try to eliminate the widths that I don't need anymore. Alright, be right back. Alright, so let's see. First I want to run it for a little bit and make sure I can do all the basics. Okay. Good. Cool. Alright, I'm happy with that. That looks like it works. You know, well, since I messed with wrapping, why don't we double check something that wraps too? One second. Okay. Alright, let's continue. So, yeah, that works. This works, whatever. I'm bored. Let's do something better. So, let's look at, why is that in DOS mode? There we go. Let's look at moving stuff into the file structure and out of the file view structure. Yeah. In fact, we could probably go so far as to put this all the way into the buffer structure. So let's start by getting rid of widths. How about that? That seems like a good first step. Buffer, get buffer, widths, line widths. Let's just see what happens if why don't we do it this way? Let me get all cleaning, new wrap rule, cleaning up some init stuff. Alright, now let's just go ahead and go wholesale and delete everything that refers to widths. Deleting shit I don't need. Deleting all this stupid shit. So much shit getting deleted. And there we go. That's like no code at all now. Ah. Measure start state. Alright, let's see if everything works. It's gonna be crazy. Oh my goodness, just working. Why is it working? It doesn't make any sense. I changed way too much stuff for that to just work. For fuck's sake. Alright, well I'm sure my code is still littered with tons of shit that thinks that widths exist, and that it just didn't throw an error to the compiler when that compiled, and so it'll be a slow, like, 6 to 8 months of me discovering little shit here and there left over from, you know, that huge dump I took all over my code at one point until I finally cleaned it all up. But, in the meantime, at least it's presumably not doing any of the work of measuring width anymore. By the way, let's take a look. 38804. Super awesome. Alright, so now the plan is that the file view, which starts right here, has this thing called a display width. And the file is going to take over that responsibility. So that's going to go under settings. We'll figure out how to pass that on. Maybe I'll store that in the working set, right? Working set default display width. Alright. For ZPP app init default display width. Yeah. Looks good. Alright, so we're getting there. That will give me... Well, I have to actually write the thing that gets the value, but this will give me a way to pull values out of the buffer so I can stop just stuffing the summary with more and more shit, which is starting to become clearly the wrong way to go. Unwrapped lines. Result equals, let's see, file settings, display width, result equals file settings dot base map ID, result equals file settings dot DOS write mode, file setting, well, result equals, and you know what I should do if I had any brains in me? So I try to line these up a little bit so that they are sort of easy to see all at once. Okay, so result equals file settings dot unimportant Strange Jack, I don't park. I don't have a car, so I'm not parking on anything, you know? If you mean what am I working on, long story. So, trying to get the wrap, the line wrapping working in a better way that handles the fact that some characters don't all have the same width. I used to just take the width of the whole line, divide by the maximum width, and so over a long line you could get drift where it's like, oh, a very wide character here actually has to be bumped down to the next line. It can't be split across, you know, half here and half there. So that means if you have a few very large characters that will all show up, you know, near the ends of the lines, eventually you have so much sort of drift that your clicking is off, and after a few lines the drift is so bad that you're like clicking and it's showing up, the cursor showing up farther down the screen. And so I fixed that, but then I was thinking about it, and since the new 4coder is going to have the width of the panel isn't going to matter, it's going to be an arbitrary margin that you set that is always the same, so you can move the panels around and the wrapping position stays the same. I figured I should put that in the buffer because it makes more sense. You don't want to see a buffer twice, but with two different wrapping positions. You want them to wrap the same way so that so that their lines make sense to each other, right? They line up. So I'm going to make wrapping a property of the buffer, which is something I've always wanted to do because it means that I can get all of the metadata in the buffers and not have some of it living in the views. And since I'm doing this, I can finally put that wrap information in the buffer, and that'll also let me do fancier wrapping that will handle the wrapping problem. So the wrapping problem is actually fixed. I got to do re-wrapping, like I got to remeasure the wrap still. But right now what I'm doing is just moving the wrap position variable to the buffer, and to do that I need to be able to edit and read the buffer, that buffer setting from the customization. So I am now rewriting the code that uh, that manages setting and getting or updating the line wrapping positions. Now, it says buffer's undeclared, and that's true. It's true the buffer's undeclared because I was not declaring it. And if I was going to be nice to my future self, I'd put a gap there so that I could read that code. Alright, so that takes me back over here. So it's saying, look, vputter, you're saying vputter, I don't know what vputter is supposed to be all about. And I'm like, you know, it's because I copy-pasted, man. It's supposed to be file, right? And it's like, implementation file, oh man, this set display width, you said you wanted to call file set display width, but I think you just made that up. I don't think there was such a thing. And I'm like, yeah. Why don't we look at what else you've got to say here? And working set, default display width is what I meant to say there. Alright, so now you're going to complain again about that function that doesn't exist, but that's okay. I'm prepared for that complaint this time because I know that it's coming. And so, what we're going to do is we're going to pop over here and we're going to find a good place to set the display width. Now the answer is we want to set the display width somewhere near the bottom of the file. This is not stuff dealing with buffer names. Let's leave that at the very bottom. But I want it to be after stuff about measurement and remeasurement of the file. Mark dirty and clean and all that stuff can stay down there. Okay, so let's take care of that, something else real quick. So I've got this convention which is stupid and dumb, and I'm getting rid of it. So let's replace that with static editing file state null editing file state equals 0. We can get rid of that. File settings static editing file settings null editing file settings equals 0. Okay, let's deal with the repercussions from that change real quick. Alright, now it's back to complaining about this function that doesn't exist, apparently. Alright, so, let's go digging around again for where we want to set this function up. Like I said, somewhere near the bottom, beneath all the stuff about measuring. Wait a minute, working set stuff begins right there. That's only 300 lines into the file. We get positions, we set positions. Does file... Where does the remeasurement stuff? Working set? That's all about managing my array, my free list of files basically, and doing stuff like that. Looking files up in the table, reordering files in their allocation list so I know what order they come in, hot directory related stuff, dirty state related stuff. Buffer get new name, binding related stuff. Okay, weird. That's crazy. Well, then. Are you telling me, take me to file view real quick. Measure starts, for instance. File measure starts. Is that living right here? What the fuck is that doing in this file? Okay, hold on. Do-do-do. Do-do-do-do-do-do-do. Buffer metadata measurement. Alright, so now what I want to do is I want to eliminate wraps y. A wrap. Somewhere around here there's a wrap. Some wrap nonsense going on. Deal with that later. There we go. Just burn all of that to the ground. So, basically what we're saying here is, look, when I want to get a cursor, I say, look, if we're doing unwrapped lines, and then he's saying, compiler in particular is saying, dude, there's no such thing as unwrapped lines in the file data in the view. What you talking about? And I go, shh, it's going to be okay. We just need to go into the view unwrapped lines. Oh, we just need to go into the file settings. That's all. Chill, dude. You too? Alright. How is it that you all don't get that you just go into the file settings for this kind of thing? Okay. So line wrap y is a kind of interesting case. Let's go to buffer cursor from position. This is all buffer related stuff. Buffer cursor from position. Yeah, so it thinks it needs a wraps pointer, but what I'm going to tell it now that it doesn't know about is that actually what's going to happen, and if I would initialize everything properly, that would make me very happy. Actually what's going to happen, and whoa, that should be an I-32, mate. What's actually going to happen is that wraps is just going to live right there in the buffer. If you don't believe me, we'll just go to the golden buffer, gap buffer, and right here, yeah, wraps. There you go. Put that in your pipe and smoke it. So yeah, don't need you, which means we can kind of reorder some of this nonsense. Not sure why line height is being stored in the view anymore. Let me do something real quick. Line height. To do. Can we burn line height to the ground now? It's what I've always wanted. Alright, there we go. Alright, so what are we doing here? Buffer cursor from wrap XY. Okay, so let's track that down. Buffer abstract, buffer cursor from line character. You don't need wraps. Buffer cursor from... Wait, I gotta tell you why you don't need wraps. I'm sorry. I'll explain. I will explain. You don't need wraps because it's right there in your buffer. Seriously, just look at it. There it is. Okay, let's keep going. You don't need wraps. It's in the buffer. You don't need wraps. again, it's in the buffer. And now I see you guys all think you need to pass wraps to these functions, and I see that someone else thinks they need to pass wraps to you. None of this is true. None of these things are important. Alright, so here we are, we're looking at getting cursor information, and you're still thinking you need to pass wraps from the view, but the view doesn't even have wraps. The buffer has the wraps now. So passing the buffer along is all you need to do. Okay, so here you're worried about unwrapped lines, and I've tried to explain this to you before, but it's you just look in the file settings. Alright, now you're worried about line count, because I deleted it. But what are you even looking at line count for? Oh, you need to compute the lowest line? Alright, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to say that wraps blah blah blah. This is just a file problem. This should compute the index of the lowest visible line, taking into account whether or not there is wrapping and there we go. So let me pop open file CPP here. Sorry. And there we go. We'll implement that later. So here it's like, what? View compute lowest line? That doesn't even exist. I'm like, dude, just chill. Just use the file version. It's right there. Just go into your file data and get the file. Unwrapped lines. Again, this is just a matter of looking in the file settings. Okay, so view measure wraps y does not exist. You are just dumb. Unwrapped lines is in the file settings. Line wrap y. Let's see. File view nullify file, and you're freeing stuff. You don't need to do that anymore. So all we do when we nullify a file now is we nullify it, and so we can get rid of this now. Burn this shit to the ground, yo. Alright, so yeah, the view doesn't store any information about wrapping lines anymore. View measure wraps isn't a thing you do. You don't measure wraps, so yeah, stop. Stop doing that. Okay, to get the wrapped information, you just go to the file settings. You just gotta go to the file settings, man. view measure wraps doesn't. It's not a good place for it because it's nowhere is a good place for measuring the wraps. Okay, you need to go to File Settings to get the unwrapped lines variable. Okay, you also need to go to File Settings. Ah, you don't need General anymore, huh? Cool. Good news. Alright, so here, update the views looking at this file. No. Instead what we need to do is just say file measure to do. We'll just do file measure wraps for now, and that will basically consist of putting the file in right there. I must have the font around here somewhere, right? It's in the file settings. Alright. Let's see if I can figure out how to get an advanced data. There we go. So back to the error at hand. I just need to get a font, get the advanced data, and then pass that into the wrap measurement. Alternatively, I could just say, look, here are the models, do whatever you need to do to remeasure the wraps, just do it. Don't get a font, don't do anything, just go. Now I know you're going to freak out that file measure wraps isn't a thing, so let's just file measure wraps models editing file invalid assert invalid code path. Oh, you don't know about models, do you? Alright. Then I'll just pass in the font for you. You don't know about fonts, huh? Okay. We'll pass in the advanced data. So it turns out we do need that and that. And font set comes from the models. Font ID is just in the file settings. Uh-oh, hold on. What's going on here? Why are you being weird? There we go. So the point is we don't need to update the views looking at this map file, we just update the file itself. So it's very nice. Measure wraps. Oh, this is going to have so many nice so many nice things about doing it this way. I'm reminded of a long time ago, me and Martin Cohen, who's the guy working on Hail, which I haven't heard from him in a while. But I remember he had a philosophy which I sort of tried to take up, which was that the buffer there should be a buffer structure which knows nothing about display and is only a data structure about storage, right? And it knows nothing about display. And then there should be another data structure that can use the buffer data structure and combine it with with display information, um, but that it's totally possible to ask for a buffer and never display it, and therefore never attach display information. I think what's happening here is I'm going completely the opposite direction at this point. I decided I totally don't want that, and I think the reason I don't want that is because it's very infrequent that I think I'm gonna want a buffer with that be with without wanting to display it, and even if I don't uh, want to display it, I still might want information about how it would have been displayed. And even if I don't want that, it doesn't cost that much. But the other issue is the flexibility of being able to view the buffer in two different ways in the terms of like it having totally different like rules about whether it's wrapped lines or unwrapped lines and where the wrap positions are in different locations. That seems completely unuseful to me when I think about it practically. So even though there's a conceptual niceness of having the buffer structure separated out, I think for optimal usefulness, I think it's better to just put that in there. 'Cause I mean, it does like, what is the problem with that? I mean, it does sort of lack that sort of perfect separation of concerns thing you might think you want, but I think letting these concerns commingle close to each other allows me to solve the problem better. Okay, we got an issue here. Shutting this down. Alright, so I just realized that one potential disadvantage of putting the wrap information in the buffer rather than keeping it in the view is now potentially, if you do edit a file, the information about that font, like the advanced information, all that, that has to become available anytime you edit that file, even though it's not being displayed. Um, but in but in theory, I could just say, no, you only ever need that if you do a full cursor seek. Like if I do a cursor seek that uses, um, uh, the screen position coordinates, and it doesn't use any of the, because there's a partial cursor seeks do like character position, line number, column number seeks. Um, Now that we're introducing um, multi-column characters properly, I'll probably need one that does line number, character number. Well, technically, what I have is line number, character number, and I need to make one that does line number, column number correctly. Um, but on top of all of that, I also need um, I need to think about if I edit a file that's not being viewed, do I load up the information about the advances for the font on that file in order to remeasure its metadata, or do I just say we need to remeasure this whenever someone does a full cursor seek? If I do the second thing, I can potentially defer it until several edits have happened, and then when I finally do need to use that full information, I do it. And sometimes there might even be cases where I never need the full information, like a buffer gets opened, never gets put on screen, and then closed, so it never mattered that the buffer um, didn't have metadata attached. So I only add metadata and I only update it whenever it's not up to date and it needs to, and I need it. The downside to that is then I can't ever really do a remeasure. I can't ever go, okay, so the edit that just happened locally affects this area. Now, what I do suspect is that the number of fonts isn't going to be crazy. Like, I don't think any practical use is not going to involve like having 100 fonts open in one in each buffer. Um, um, so I think what I could do is just have a sort of a small internal max of like there's 16 pinned fonts, and if you try to set a buffer to a font that isn't already pinned and all 16 slots are already pinned by other buffers that are still open, it'll just fail and just pick a different one, like whatever. Um, And maybe someday that'll work out in a better way. Maybe I'll find a better way to work that out in the future. But I think that is just what I'm going to assume for now, is that we're going to artificially remove the case where we need to have a bunch of font information loaded in across. We can, of course, like not keep it loaded in all of the render information even for those fonts. It's just we need the advanced information for the fonts to make it work. Okay. Anyway, um, Alright, I want to see if I can eliminate this, how difficult that would be. Looks like my customization doesn't at all rely on knowing whether or not I have wrapped lines. Or even ever, like, maybe not even setting them? What was the thing I just changed? Okay, let's try that. Let's suppose we get rid of this, and then we just clean up all the stuff that used to think that views had information about line wraps, which they clearly just don't. Getting to delete so much code. Code, deletion. Destroying all this code. Do 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 do. Do do do. You may assume that the file exists, because we don't allow views to have no file pointers anymore. Do 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 do. Alright, now everything has got to be broken, right? You guys agree? I must not have. Alright, there we go. I forgot to implement that stuff. There we go. That's a good one. Okay, so these things are not implemented yet. File remeasure starts, or file measure starts. What's happening here? Okay, so this works. Question. When I file measure wraps, I must assume that I know the count already. So I've already done file measure starts. And what I do is I go over here to my buffer code. I look at gap buffer. And I say, alright, gap buffer, you said you were going to store wraps, but we're actually going to keep that plan. File measure wraps, the question becomes how much, because down here we have buffer, okay, in the abstract there we have buffer measure starts, right? And then we have remeasure starts, then we have measure widths that we're just going to delete because it's dumb. Then we have buffer measure wrap y. And what we're going to do is we're going to say buffer measure wrap y was a good setup. It was a good idea. The only difference that we want to see now is that we don't pass in the wrap y. We just pull it out of the buffer. Right? Wraps. There we go. So now, right here, I'm just doing a buffer measure wrap y, right, on the file state buffer. Given a font height, an advance amount, and a max width, which the file knows. The file has in its settings the display width, so that's not even a problem. The only thing left to deal with is that we didn't pass the font height all the way through, so we'll probably have to do that. Now, supposing we're passing the font height all the way through, there's one other thing we need to consider, which is that the wraps array needs to be guaranteed to be big enough. Gap buffer. Yeah, so what I need from you, gap buffer, is I need to know the wrap max at any given time. Right? I need to be able to know what that is. And that means, for instance, when I'm sitting right here and I go, okay, if file, let's just get the buffer type, actually, buffer, and let's just go ahead and grab that and put that there, and there we go. Let's just say, like, okay, suppose that the buffer wraps equals 0, or suppose that buffer wrap max is just less than By the way, when I init the buffer, do I gap buffer init need more init page size, init provide page, end init init buffer. Okay. Yes. Well, let's just say buffer wraps equals 0 here, just to be sure. And then buffer rep max is less. What if it's less than the buffer line count? By the way, is it dark? Has it become dark? Yeah, it's getting dark. So let's do this. Doop. Almost out of time today. Alright, so under those circumstances, what I want to do is say, I wish I had general memory. Okay, so we need to pass general memory all the way to here so that we can do something very similar to this, which is basically, this is if we don't have line starts at all, and then if we run out it does more growing there. So what I want to do is say, look, if we don't have line starts at all, okay, so if this is 0, we'll do one thing, and else, if that situation, we'll do something else. Okay, so max equals buffer line count. Let's times that by 2, or let's do I have like a roundup? Can I get like I'm gonna double that, and then I'm gonna say, look, that's fine and all, but please subtract out 1 bit shift 10. So 1, 2, 4, 8, 10, 20, 40, 80, 100, 200. Okay, so what we're going to do is say max equals that. Max equals max minus that much. No, max plus that much. I'm doing that. Okay. And then, and, I just did this recently, I think I remember it, and the bit not of OX 200 minus 1. By 200 minus 1, what I really mean is just, 1FF. 1FF, right? So that should round me up to a multiple of kilobyte, which, when applied to the number of floats in an array, gives me a full 4K, which is 1 page, which is irrelevant but fun to do. Maybe someday it'll matter, but probably not. Probably never gonna get to that point. Okay, whatever. So then what I want to do is buffer wraps equals F32 pointer general memory allocate. No, not reallocate. Thank you. General max times size of 32. And then I can go ahead and set buffer wrap max to max. Alright, if I'm in this situation, then the situation I'm in requires that max become buffer line count times 2, same basic principle, rounded up to a k, so that when it gets multiplied by 4 it's a 4k, and then I need a reallocation. And what a reallocation looks like is I go, new wraps, F32 star, general memory reallocate on the general memory of the buffer wraps of the size of F32 times the count. What is the count? okay, so times the old max, size of F32 times the max, right? And the old max is just this thing we have over here, which is just like, oh, I'm the old max, and I'm just equal to whatever the max was equal to before we started this process. Okay. And then right here, we have tentative assert the new wraps, and then what we do is we buffer wraps equals the new wraps, and buffer wrap max, of course, is now, of course, the max, obviously, of course. So that's all fun and fine, but why don't I put a 0 right there? Okay, and then what I can do is buffer measure wrap y needs a font height. There we go. And so it's got a buffer. That buffer is guaranteed to have enough memory for storing all of the wraps. Oh, this is going to be so cool. Since we're right here doing this right now, we already predicted we might need this, and it's always good. I think that in general, if you have an array that is like measuring things or counting, listing things, whatever, it's almost always nice to put a terminating point. Like, if you need to store n things, store n plus 1 thing, so that the thing at the end can be like, you know, the sum of all of them, or the whatever would come next in that series, but doesn't, because it doesn't actually, just put it there anyway, because it makes a lot of algorithms very easy to write. Okay, so my point is, all of these need to assume that the line count is 1 greater than what it tactually is. You know what I'm saying? So if the line count is buffer arrow line count, then buffer arrow line count plus 1 is what I want to plug into this formula that I set up, so that I have the assumption that line count is 1 greater than it is. That way, if I want to go ahead and put that extra spot in there, I can do that and we'll be all good to go. So if I take that and I measure the wraps, we'll be good. Blah 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 blah. File compute lowest line. So this should compute the index of the blah 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 blah. Okay, got it. So what I need to do is get rid of that. I need to look at the file settings unwrapped lines situation, and either I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. If I'm going to do this, then the lowest line is the line count. Might be plus 1. Let me check. Since I went and deleted that code, I'm just going to pull open Bitbucket here. And let's see. Let me look at my source from the previous push. Where file view. Okay. Compute lowest line. I see. I32 last line equals this. Last line. Blah blah. And and then what we need to do is ignore the rest of that because it's unrelated now. Although I do need to know the font height for this operation, if I'm in the wrapped line mode specifically. So if I'm sitting around here trying to figure out what the lowest line is and I don't have unwrapped lines, then what I do have is wrapped lines. And that means I can look at the wraps. So I can go last line y equals look at the file buffer wraps, last line or whatever, right? Just whatever, and then take the terminal line y as just that plus 1, right? Because like I said, we're going to store that extra magical plus 1 past the end thing. And then what we're going to do is backpedal and say that that was dumb. Actually, what we want is just lowest line equals the term line y, which makes me wonder, why don't I just which means I can get rid of this entirely because it's dumb, and do it this way, right? And then if I take term line y and divide out the font height, and then I subtract 1, I have what I need. Pretty cool. So, that one's done. Now all that's left to do is to run it and get all of the usefulness. Semicolon situation, no biggie. Font height. You also need general memory. Buffer. I meant file state buffer. Okay, you know what? Hold on. Why don't we just say buffer type, buffer pointer, equals the file state buffer. Alright? So then you can all stop bugging me about this shit, and I can write my code in a shorter way. Alright? So just do it that way. Doop. Just seal 32 that shit. Alright, so computing the lowest line, and it's all like, whoa, why is this so complicated? And I'm like, just pass in the line height, bro. I don't know why you're storing it in the view in the first place, but as long as you've got it. And then it's all like, I don't want to pass an integer where there's a float parameter. Let me cast it. And I say, alright, go ahead. Alright, so file measure wraps is saying to me, dude, I need way more parameters than this. And I'm like, you're right. So here's that. And I assume I've got like a font height sitting around here somewhere too. Height. No. Okay. Well, I've got the font. Does that have the height in it? I don't even know which of those is the one I need. View line height equals font height. Okay, it's the font height that I care about. So, in order to file measure wraps, I just need to take the font. Whoa a minute. That should be an assert advanced data. We should just be, oh my goodness. Okay, let's get rid of that. And then this here can just be font, height, which apparently is a float. Don't understand why that's a float. Probably should be an int, apparently. Again, it's like I can't file measure wraps, man. I need the general memory for starters, and I'm gonna need access to. Why don't we just do the same thing here we did there? Take that, F32 it, line, put in the height, call it a day. Alright, again, he's going, this is crazy sauce, man. I need the general memory, and I need the advanced data. But in addition to the advanced data, I need the height. I need the height of the font. I go, alright, you got everything you need. Next. File, set display width. Alright, so this one as well is like, I need the general memory. I need you to pass in the height. Please cast that to an F32. for unimaginable reasons. General's not set up. Oh. Okay. Very well. Well, I want you to understand that means you're going to have to be a two-liner. Okay. So I just went super crazy nutso. It shouldn't work. Let's figure out where it breaks. Okay. Okay, let's just shrink it. Okay. Okay, so let's pop over here on messages, and it has the same. Why is that working? Okay, let's try something different. DLL, good. Move around this, alright. Clicking around. Well, I can't scroll with the mouse for some reason. Here I can scroll with the mouse, but here I cannot. If I do that, yeah, mouse scrolling doesn't. Scroll wheel does not appear to work under wrapping. Oh, the view verticalness doesn't appear to work. It's like the view is stuck at 0. I wonder if we're computing the lowest line the wrong way. We're getting the wrong result. Oh, that's exactly what's happening, because we never filled that last spot in the array. Okay, so we need to go over to buffer. So I said we would do it, but we didn't actually do it, was the problem. We need to measure the wraps. Okay. When we're measuring wraps, we come around here, and we put the last wrap there. I'd like to put wraps wrap index plus plus the current wrap in the spot after that, right? And that should be it. And by the way, that means this should plus 1 equals line count. No, wait, sorry, minus 1 equals line count. Uh-oh, did I just... Okay, it's working. Okay, say I do it this way. Good. Say I open up the DLL, scroll around there, everything's working. Let's say I don't use wrapped lines, everything's working, I close everything. Okay, so let me do one more commit here on stream. Moved line wrapping rules 100% to buffer data structures. Okay, so that's it, folks. With all that done, what we can do now is do what I wanted to do from the beginning, which is check off this spot. So, before I can do that, there is something else I need to do, which is reformulate the cursor seeking can stay the way it is because views are still related to cursor seeking, but provide full cursor positioning in buffers. Provide cursor positioning that does columns correctly. So yep, check one off, add 2 to the list, and that will be it for today's stream. Thank you to everyone who is here now, or was here at the beginning, or was here anytime in the middle. See you guys around. Bye bye.